It's Our Story. Jim Charlton, Chicago, Illinois.
Well, let's see where to start. I mean, there's so many things that one could say. I guess the first thing to say about Ed is that he was a really wonderful guy. And I think that in some ways it's hard to differentiate his personality from, the way in which he touched people politically. He was very warm and he was very optimistic. And he was very optimistic in spite of the conditions that existed in a time that we have really no way of describing well looking back on it, given the success of the disability rights movement in the U.S. and what happened in Berkeley. So I think that's one thing that really needs to be said, is that he was a great guy, an optimistic guy.
Scott, can you get the door? Just knocking on the door.
In addition, I think something else ought to be said, and that is that it's not, or it shouldn't be, a surprise to anybody that somebody like Ed emerged out of the Bay Area when he did. Disability rights was, and hopefully still is, a very radical idea about social change, about society, about the way society should be, the way it should look, the way that people should interact with each other, especially interact with people who are different. And that was one of the reasons I think that someone like Ed emerged when he did, was he came out of an environment that wasn't just tolerant, but that was very critically minded and creative. And so I think it wasn't just Ed, it was the intersection of Ed Roberts being where he was when he was there. Ed was a real fun-loving guy, and he was one of these people that was very serious, but also he understood about the long run. He understood that what we were trying to do and are trying to do takes a long time, and that you got to have fun in the meantime. And that in some ways also separated him from a lot of other people who were either they were in it for the month or the year, or they were so serious that everything was life and death. And Ed was not like that. Ed was a serious guy, but he was also lots of fun. He was very serious. Ed was a pothead. Ed was stoned almost every day that I knew him. I think whether that ever makes it on this film or not, but one of his stories about himself was that maybe the funnest thing he ever did was swim with the dolphins and the whales. And I remember a mutual friend of ours who went with him on that trip talking about it, and how complicated it was to get a guy on a ventilator into the ocean off of a boat, but he did it. So he was very adventuresome. He was very creative. And he was very radical. He really believed that the way forward for people with disabilities was a radical vision of a new kind of life, a new kind of world where people accepted each other and also united with each other to find the ways to create a better world. And he was always thinking about what would a better world be, what would a better world look like. And he did it with a spirit and a twist that very few other people offered. So that would be, besides all of the obvious stuff, that he was the founder of independent living, that he was the founder of the Berkeley Center for Independent Living, along with a few other people, that he lived a pretty long life, and he lived a very full life. Besides the fact that he said that people with disabilities had to have their own voice. I dedicated the book I wrote to Ed, Nothing About Us Without Us, and I did it because he really believed, not just that he was a great guy, but he really believed in people's power, and he really believed in voice and self-determination. And I started the book with a quote from Ed that went like this: one of the things we've learned from the civil rights movement is if you give up your voice, you lose. And what Ed meant by that was that in the civil rights movement, African American people had to speak for themselves and had to lead. And the same way was true with the disability rights movement. The disabled people had to lead and had to have their own voice. And so in terms of political empowerment, that statement, that perspective, the perspective of self-determination, of control, has to be at the heart of anything. And I think that was really what was at the heart of Ed's life. Was he wanted control of his life, and he wanted people with disabilities to have more control of their lives.
The It's Our Story project is a national effort to make disability history public and accessible. Visit us at www.itsourstory.org or on the It's Our Story project YouTube channel.